As of right now, the Brawl Stars roster has a total of 67 brawlers to choose from, and today I'm going to do my best to cover the most satisfying thing about each and every one of them. Most of these are things that you can definitely relate to, however some of them are just guilty pleasures I have that definitely don't give me any advantage towards winning. Let's begin. Starting off with Shelly, I've gotta say her most satisfying thing is definitely using her super at close range. I mean, sure, it's fun to hit someone from a distance using Shell Shock and then take them down with Clay Pigeons, but if you can get up close and watch yourself do 4,300 damage with one super, it's amazing. For Nita, I think the most satisfying thing definitely comes from using her bear and successfully landing the stun gadget and then watching it shred the enemy. Bonus points if you use Hyper Bear. This one's definitely much harder for players like me who have a bad aim, but for Cold, it's easily lining up your super and hitting multiple targets, especially if you get lucky enough for it to fully refill. As for Bull, and I know this one's a bit controversial, the most satisfying thing is finding a Mortis in Showdown. The lengths I go to bring him down are definitely a little excessive, but nothing's stopping me. The most satisfying thing about Brock is being able to hit multiple attacks because his blast size is so big. Also, he can sometimes win encounters up close that he should not be winning, like I did with the BB right there. Now get ready for this. The most satisfying thing about El Primo is when you're carrying all the gems in Gem Grab and it's countdown, and you rush the enemy team with your super and take them all out. Please don't actually try this. The most satisfying thing about using Barley is when you know you're facing a standstill target such as the high safe or enemy's equipment like a Jessie turret, and you know that when you throw your attack it's going to get its fullest damage off on them. Absolutely amazing. For Poco, and you may have guessed it, it's definitely hitting your entire team with your super. Every time I do this I just feel like such a good teammate to them, and it's definitely relieving. The most satisfying thing about Rosa is watching an enemy go into a nearby bush when you know that you can use your gadget to slow them, catch up to them, and take them down. Now for Jessie, there are surely many things to choose from, but if I were to pick, the absolute most satisfying thing would definitely be dropping my super on top of the enemy safe and using a gadget to speed up its attack. Next up is Dynamite, and I thought of this one because I'm usually on the opposite end of this interaction, and that is having an 8-bit as an opponent. 8-bit is a super easy target for Dynamite on account of his very slow speed, and let's face it, we all want easy targets in this game. Next up is Tick, and for him it's easily going to be blowing people up with your super, especially when you drop it against a very close range brawler when there's pretty much nothing they can do about it. 8-bit is up next, and it would only make sense to say that the best thing to do as him is drop your super, use your gadget, and melt the high safe. The most satisfying thing about Rico is his ability to take even the slightest break from combat and fully restore his health using just one ammo with the Bouncy Castle gadget. Before I share this one, I will say that in most cases it provides no strategic advantage. But for Daryl, I find the most satisfying thing to be using a super across water. And that's it. I just like to give him a longer roll. As for Penny, and I guess I have to use New Penny, but still, the most satisfying thing will just be dropping her super and using the gadget to make it rain on the enemies. Carl definitely has a lot of choices as to what is the most satisfying thing about him, but I have decided that it's gotta be when you just barely make contact with your attack and you get 2 quick hits off of an enemy. Doing this in Top Dog is even better. The most satisfying thing to do when playing as Jackie is what I call a shoot and drill shot. It's difficult to set up but easy to perform, and all you have to do is shoot the ball and immediately tap your super, and that will clear the path and almost always score. The most satisfying thing for Gus also comes from my lack of aim, and that is when I actually hit one of my allies with the super balloon thing. It makes me feel like a good teammate when I'm able to land my super on them. Now, the most satisfying thing about Bo is definitely more of a toxic trait for me, and that is dropping his mines in just the spot that will ruin the opponent's day. Also, it's fun when your super randomly fills up and you know that you blew somebody up. Now, this one may be disagreed upon, but I found that the most satisfying thing about Ems is her ability to abuse her through the walls gadget in Top Dog Showdown. I mean, look at this one. It's using all 3 gadgets just to ruin one person's game. I mean, for Stu, it's pretty simple. The most satisfying thing is the fact that he's able to pretty much have his super the entire game. That is, if you play him right. Piper's was actually hard to choose from, but I have decided that the most satisfying thing about playing her is bringing people down in knockout. And this is not what I meant by that. As for Pam, I think the most satisfying thing about her has gotta be her Scrap Sucker gadget and approaching an enemy and just draining all their ammo. It's always great to hit them with that attack and know that they won't be able to shoot back for a moment. The most satisfying thing about Frank is bringing him into Brawl Ball and using his super. He can destroy all the walls that protect them and keep them trapped at spawn for a little bit. As for Bibi, I absolutely love her ability to run fast. She can approach enemies pretty easily in battle, and she is super fun to play as a result of her fast speed. Next up is Bee, and the most satisfying thing for her is when you slow the enemies and you know that they are screwed. Anyone who's played Bee before knows how great it feels when the enemy is slowed and you're about to drill them with a supercharged shot. Next up is Nanny, and I think we can agree on the fact that the absolute best thing is when you're twirling your super around the map and then you just one-shot the enemy because you're using the autofocus star power. Trolling with the return to sender gadget is a very close second. Next we have Edgar, and honestly I don't really play him that much, but if I do, I can imagine the best thing to be getting all the power cubes in Showdown. I mean, it seems to happen a lot, right? Griff has one of the deadliest supers in the game, and as a result, I think the most satisfying thing about using him is opening up the map and then shredding the enemy team with his super. It seems to work on a large amount of maps, and I absolutely love it. The most satisfying thing about Grom is definitely one of the hardest to do, and that would be landing the triple shot that you get from his gadget. I mean, in most occasions, if you make full contact with one of these attacks, the enemies will be taken down. And of course, it's amazing to bring someone down with just one ammo. Now, I never really used Bonnie to begin with, but I think that the most satisfying thing about her is using her super at full distance and landing on an enemy and then just taking them down. The most satisfying thing about Mortis... if you ask any Mortismen, they'll say team wipe. The most satisfying thing about Terra, and it's a little difficult to do, but that would be getting the entire enemy team in one Black Portal super. It is perhaps one of the easiest team wiping abilities that you can pull off. It's definitely fun to grab anyone with Jean's super, but I find it most satisfying whenever I'm able to steal the gem carrier in gem grab, and sometimes make them crash into painful objects. The most satisfying thing about Max doesn't even require you to play as her, but instead when you have a teammate who is Max and they use their super next to you and you get that movement speed, that right there is the most satisfying thing she can bring you. Now, I sat here for a while thinking of something for Mr. P and I just couldn't come up with one. But I did come up with this, and anyone who plays without volume cannot relate. But his Porter sound effects are like music to my ears, and that is what I think is the most satisfying thing about him. Now, the most satisfying thing about Sprout is not just using its super, but using the gadget to bring your super back and relocate it if you're in trouble. It's an amazing ability, and I absolutely love using it every time I need to. Say what you want about this one, the absolute most satisfying thing about Byron is his voice lines. He was built with amazing character, and I will spam his pins the entire game just to hear what he has to say.
Sign here with your life.
The most satisfying thing about Squeak is definitely a rare occasion, but that would be landing his super on everything. I mean, sure, it's easy to land it on a still target like a safe, but if you can get it on an enemy and take him down instantly, it always feels great. The most satisfying thing about Gray was once using his original grand piano gadget, but now that that's gone, I guess the only other option is his teleport, but nothing will ever compare to using that massive piano. The most satisfying thing about Willow, I ended up finding to be misuse of her super by trapping the enemies within the walls. I mean, honestly, you should try this. You probably saw this one coming. The most satisfying thing about Spike is getting some alone time with the save. His ability to break it in about 11 attacks is unbelievable. As for Crow, the most satisfying thing, and you can probably agree on this, is when you finally fill up his super. Given that it's one of the strongest supers in the game, it takes a lot of attacks to charge, and when you finally fill that yellow circle, it's always the best feeling for a Crow user. Next up is Leon, and I find the most satisfying thing about him to be the speed star power that makes him run really fast while invisible. I think it's fun how fast he can travel while invisible and how far away he can sneak up on people from. Now, what I find the most satisfying thing for Sandy is definitely evil. And it is trolling with his second gadget. And basically, no matter what the situation is, I will spin when I sleep the enemies with the gadget, and it's probably also the most toxic thing I do in the game altogether. As for Amber, I'm okay with just saying that the most satisfying thing is landing all her shots. Granted, it's satisfying landing all your shots no matter who you use, but since Amber has 40 individual ammo, I guess it just feels different. Now, the most satisfying thing about Meg is when you play Top Dog Showdown, you find another Meg, and then you take them out because you don't team. Now, Chester's almost too much a man of luck for this, but either way, I find it most satisfying if I can make full contact with this 4-shot attack, or get the super that I like. Moving on to the Chromatics, we start with Gale, and the most satisfying thing about him is pushing an enemy into the wall and stunning them with the Blustery Blow star power. This usually results in an easy takedown. Next up we have Surge, and I want to say that the most satisfying thing about him is upgrading to Stage 3. That's right, I'm not a big fan of Stage 4, it's not too much of a difference, but the movement speed applied from Stage 2 and the range buff put on in Stage 3 is definitely so relieving to get. Especially since Surge starts off slow and weak, the transformation always feels very nice. As for Colette, her most satisfying thing is definitely easy if you play the right game mode, and that is simply finding the high HP enemy. It's always lovely when you approach a Rosa or an El Primo or a Frank and you know that your first attack is going to do a few thousand damage. Lose is also somewhat easy, and that is simply throwing your super into the hot zone so the enemy team has to suffer if they want to win. As for Colonel Ruffs, all of us good teammates out there can definitely relate to saying that the most satisfying thing about him is using field promotion on your duos partner. I mean, seriously, who doesn't want a 10,000 HP tick on their team? Yet again, I'm gonna mention my terrible aim before I say this one. The most satisfying thing about Belle is hitting someone with your super, knowing that they're stuck with that mark until they're either gone or until I guess you mark someone else. As for Buzz, the most satisfying thing is connecting with your super and watching yourself pull into them and they get stunned, and you usually get a takedown depending on who you've done it to. And honestly, longer range hits always seem a bit more satisfying, I don't know why, but overall Buzz is one of the only brawlers where I'm able to completely wipe out a showdown match with. Ash is another brawler where I've got to say the most satisfying thing about him is of course his voice lines. Besides that, I will say though that one of my favorite things is also having his rage full while I have high HP, because it gives you a lot more opportunities to rush people with high damage and a slightly faster speed. Next up is Lola, and I think that the most satisfying thing about her is when you drop your ego right at your feet and then hit all your shots because you have two Lolas. I mean, honestly, any game mode, most players drop their egos at their feet. Even though the second one does less damage, there's still a lot of projectiles to hit the enemies. Now, I love how fast Fang's super is, and as a result, I think the most satisfying thing about him is the classic super stun combo. Especially in Showdown, this is a very powerful move because you can approach the enemy, you'll stun them, and then you basically kick them until they're power cubes. I'm not a big fan of Eve, and I don't care too much about winning with Eve, but I will say that the most satisfying thing about her is the ability to float over water. If I ever select her, my only objective is to just float around over the water because she serves no other purpose to me. Janet's another brawler that I don't care too much about winning with, but I will say the most satisfying thing about her is definitely flying around with her super because it is pretty cool. Oh, and she does have some pretty good voice lines. Otis is amazing. I will say that his voice lines are one of the most satisfying things about him, as he's just awesome to listen to. And I also will say that it is super satisfying to trap enemies with the super gadget combo, watching them get silenced just by taking a few wrong steps. Sam is another brawler where I can just run around the showdown match and punch everyone and defeat them all. And I think that one of the most satisfying things to do as Sam is fill up his super the second time and retract his fist back to him, because it's actually somewhat hard to do, but also a very fun move to use. Next up we have Buster, and I'd like to say that the most satisfying thing about using him is using his super while inside a bush and tricking the enemies. Because they can't see your super, they might end up damaging themselves. Mandy's is simple because I have no other way to put it. I just like to hit enemies with her super. It fills halfway upon contact and does massive damage, enough to the point where I don't even really like using her regular attack. I think that the former Jackie man in me has to say that the most satisfying thing about RT is taking his second form and floating around hitting enemies with his Jackie-like attack. Last but not least, we have Maisie, and I want to say that the most satisfying thing about her is using her finish him gadget on a really low health enemy and seeing how high the damage number can reach. Anyways, that is the most satisfying thing about all 67 brawlers in the game. That's all I have for today. Thank you very much for sticking to the end, and I will see you later. Peace out.